Imagine this. Your disabled son needs an ambulance parked right outside your house in an emergency, but the homeowners association, yes, the very people meant to keep the neighborhood safe and fair, decides to ban it. Sounds unbelievable, right? Well, that's exactly what happened to me. I'm about to share a wild story from the Entitled People Reddit community that blew my mind and will probably shock you too. It all started when my son's health took a sudden turn, and the ambulance had to be there in the driveway. But the HOA sent a notice saying no emergency vehicles could be parked there, even in a crisis. I felt completely powerless and outraged at how the rules seemed to forget about basic human needs and compassion. This wasn't just about a driveway or parking rules. It was about standing up for my son's rights and fighting back against an unfair system. So, I did something most people wouldn't dare. I sued the HOA for $100,000. But the story doesn't end there. The HOA pushed back harder than I expected, and things got even messier. What happens next? Did I win, or did the HOA's rules crush my fight? Stay tuned, because this battle is far from over, and you won't believe the twists ahead. To understand why this fight even started, you need to know a bit about my family and the neighborhood we live in. My son has a serious medical condition that requires frequent emergency care. Having an ambulance ready at home isn't just a convenience, it's a necessity. We've always followed the HOA rules, paid our fees, and tried to be good neighbors. But when my son's health declined suddenly, I needed that ambulance parked right outside without any delays. The HOA, however, has strict guidelines about what can be parked in the driveway. Their rules say no commercial or emergency vehicles are allowed to park for extended periods. When I explained the situation, hoping for understanding, they just sent a formal letter threatening fines and towing. It felt like they were more concerned about appearances than a family's urgent medical needs. The frustration and fear were overwhelming. How could a set of rules be more important than my son's safety? I reached out to neighbors, many of whom were sympathetic but scared to challenge the HOA themselves. That's when I realized this wasn't just about parking. It was about power, control, and the cold way some organizations treat people who don't fit their perfect image. As I prepared to take legal action, the HOA doubled down, making it clear they weren't going to back down without a fight. What came next was something I never expected: legal battles, community drama, and questions about fairness that go far beyond just my street. The conflict quickly grew beyond just a parking spot. The HOA's insistence on enforcing their rules without any exceptions felt like a personal attack on my family's well-being. They argued that allowing the ambulance in the driveway would set a precedent and disrupt the neighborhood's appearance. But what about my son's safety? That question seemed to fall on deaf ears. Meanwhile, some neighbors quietly supported us, sharing their own stories of struggles with the HOA's strict policies. One neighbor even told me they once faced fines for leaving their recycling bin out a little too long. It became clear this wasn't just about an ambulance. It was about how the HOA controlled every detail of our lives. Another subplot unfolded when a few HOA board members privately admitted they felt torn but feared backlash from other residents if they showed any leniency. This added a layer of complexity I hadn't expected. It wasn't just about rules, but about politics and fear inside the community. As the legal battle began, tensions in the neighborhood grew. Some people took sides openly, while others whispered behind closed doors. The HOA sent more warnings, threatening hefty fines if I didn't comply. I felt isolated, but also more determined. Fighting for my son's right to emergency care became a symbol of standing up to unfair power, but it also meant risking relationships with neighbors I'd known for years. The question hanging over everything was, how far would the HOA go to enforce their rules? And what would I be willing to sacrifice to protect my son? The answers were still out of reach, and the battle was just heating up. As the days passed, the pressure from the HOA became almost unbearable. Notices kept arriving, each one more threatening than the last. They warned me that if the ambulance was ever parked in my driveway again, they'd tow it without hesitation, and impose fines that could pile up into thousands of dollars. It felt like they were trying to break me, to make me give up and accept their cold, inflexible rules. But every time I thought about my son's health, I knew I couldn't back down. The neighborhood started feeling different too. Some neighbors who had been friendly before now avoided me, afraid of getting caught in the middle of the fight. Others quietly expressed support but seemed nervous about speaking up openly. The community that once felt like home now felt divided and tense, like a powder keg waiting to explode. The HOA board held a meeting that I wasn't allowed to attend, where they discussed my case behind closed doors. Rumors spread that they were planning to take more drastic action, possibly even legal moves to force me out. I began to wonder if this fight was going to cost us everything, not just money, but peace of mind and the neighborhood we loved. With the lawsuit officially filed, the stakes couldn't have been higher. I was fighting for more than just a parking spot. It was about dignity, rights, and my son's safety. The tension was building, and I knew the next few weeks could change everything. Would the HOA finally back down? Or was this just the beginning of a battle that could tear the whole neighborhood apart? The answer was still hanging in the balance. Just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, a shocking twist turned the whole situation upside down. Out of nowhere, the HOA sent me a letter accusing me of violating other community rules, this time claiming that I had unauthorized modifications on my property. Suddenly, the ambulance parking issue wasn't the only fight on my hands. They said I had landscaping changes that didn't have approval and threatened even bigger fines and legal actions if I didn't reverse them immediately. It felt like they were trying to pile on every possible complaint to pressure me into backing down. What caught me completely off guard was when some of the neighbors who had been quiet before started siding with the HOA. Apparently, the strict rules weren't just about keeping things pretty, they were about control. A few board members were even rumored to be planning to push for more restrictions, not just on parking, but on other daily activities around the neighborhood. The tension was no longer just between me and the HOA, it was spreading through the whole community. At the same time, I discovered that the ambulance company was also hesitant to keep servicing my home because of the HOA's threats. If they pulled out, my son's emergency care would be in real jeopardy. The stakes had just skyrocketed. This wasn't simply about a driveway anymore. It was about access to life-saving care, neighbors' loyalties, and how far an HOA could push its power before everything exploded. I had to prepare for what could be the toughest fight of my life, and the story was far from over. The day the court hearing finally arrived, everything felt like it was hanging by a thread. I stood before the judge, laying out the story of my son's urgent medical needs and the unfair restrictions the HOA had placed on our family. I showed the ambulance service agreements, medical records, and even testimonies from neighbors who supported us quietly behind the scenes. It was clear this wasn't just a parking dispute, it was about basic human rights and compassion. The HOA fought back hard, arguing their rules were necessary to protect the neighborhood's character. But as the evidence piled up, the judge's expression shifted. After hours of intense back and forth, the ruling finally came down. The HOA was ordered to allow emergency vehicles, like ambulances, to park in driveways when medically necessary, and they had to drop all fines related to the ambulance parking. It felt like a huge victory, not just for me and my son, but for anyone facing rigid, unfair HOA rules. Just when I thought it was over, an unexpected twist surfaced. As the judge was about to adjourn, my lawyer revealed new information. During the investigation, it was discovered that some HOA board members had been secretly accepting payments from a private security company in exchange for enforcing rules more aggressively. This corruption scandal rocked the neighborhood, opening a whole new can of worms that threatened to change everything about how our community was governed. The fight for my son's ambulance parking wasn't just about one family's struggle anymore, it had uncovered something much bigger. And as I walked out of the courtroom, I knew this battle was just the beginning of a larger fight for fairness and transparency in our neighborhood. After the courtroom drama settled, things in the neighborhood slowly began to change. The HOA board members involved in the corruption scandal were removed, and new leaders were elected, people who promised to listen and be fair. The new board immediately revised the rules to make clear exceptions for emergency vehicles, especially when health and safety are involved. It was a relief to finally feel heard and understood after months of tension and stress. My son's ambulance was never blocked again, and his care went back to being the priority it should have always been. Some neighbors who had been silent came forward, sharing their own struggles with the HOA, and together we started pushing for a more transparent and compassionate community. What began as a fight over a parking spot turned into a much-needed wake-up call about how rules should serve people, not control them. Looking back, the whole experience taught me how important it is to stand up for what's right, even when the odds seem stacked against you. No family should have to choose between following rules and protecting their loved ones. If there's one thing I hope you take away from this story, it's that fairness and kindness must come first, especially when someone's life depends on it.